Welcome to another episode of Human Wreckage. I am Thomas. Today we will be talking about the horrible tragedy of what happened to Shanda Sharer. When I scripted this and went back through review, I actually took out a lot of information that was just too graphic. This is a messed up story that changed many people's lives. Let's get into it. Shanda Sharer was born in the Pineville Community Hospital in Pineville, Kentucky on June 6, 1979 to Stephen Sharer and his wife Jacqueline, who was later known as Jacqueline Vaught. After Sharer parents divorced, her mother remarried and the family moved to Louisville. There, Sharer attended 5th and 6th grades at St. Paul School, where she was on the cheerleading, volleyball, and softball teams. When her mother divorced again, the family moved in June 1991 to New Albany, Indiana, and Sharer enrolled at Hazelwood Middle School. Early in the school year, she transferred to Our Lady of Perpetual Help School, a Catholic school in New Albany, where she joined the girls' basketball team. Melinda Lovelace was born in New Albany on October 28, 1975, the youngest of 3 daughters to Marjorie and Larry Lovelace. Larry was drafted into the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War, and although horribly emotionally scarred, he was treated as a hero upon his return. Marjorie later described him as a sexual deviant who would wear her and her daughter's underwear and makeup, was incapable of staying monogamous, and had a mixture of jealousy and fascination with seeing her have sex with other men and women. They lived in or near New Albany throughout Melinda's childhood. Larry worked irregularly for the Southern Railway after his military service. His profession allowed him to work whenever most convenient for him. In 1965, Larry became a probationary officer with the New Albany Police Department, but was fired after 8 months when he and his partner assaulted an African-American man whom Larry accused of sleeping with his wife. In 1988, Larry briefly worked as a mail carrier, but quit after 3 months and did very little work, having brought most of his mail home to destroy it. The extent of Larry's abuse of his daughters and other children is unclear. Various court testimonies claimed he fondled Melinda as an infant, molested Marjorie's 13-year-old sister early in the marriage, and molested the girl's cousin Teddy from age 10 to 14. Both older girls said he molested them, though Melinda did not admit this ever happened to her. She slept in bed with him until he abandoned his family when she was 14. Larry was verbally abusive to his daughters and fired a handgun in the direction of Melinda's older sister Michelle when she was 7, intentionally missing her. He would also embarrass his children by finding their underwear and smelling it in front of other family members. For 2 years, beginning when Melinda was 5, the family was deeply involved in the Graceland Baptist Church. Larry and Marjorie gave full confession and renounced drinking and swinging while they were members. Larry became a Baptist lay preacher and Marjorie became the school nurse. The church later arranged for Melinda to be taken to a motel room with a 50-year-old man for a 5-hour exorcism. Larry became a marriage counselor with the church and acquired a reputation for being too forward with women, eventually attempting to assault one of them. After that incident, the Lovelace parents left the church and returned to their former professions and drinking. In November 1990, after Larry was caught spying on Melinda and a friend, Marjorie attacked him with a knife. He was sent to the hospital after he attempted to grab it. She then attempted suicide again, and her daughters called authorities. After this incident, Larry filed for divorce and moved to Avon Park, Florida. Melinda felt crushed, especially when Larry remarried. Mary Lorraine Tackett was born in Madison, Indiana on October 5, 1974. Her mother was a fundamentalist Pentecostal Christian, and her father was a factory worker with 2 felony convictions. In the 1960s, Tackett claimed that she was molested at least twice as a child at ages 5 and 12. In May 1989, her mother discovered that Tackett was changing from a dress into jeans at school, and after a confrontation that night, attempted to strangle her. Social workers became involved, and Tackett's parents agreed to unannounced visits to ensure that child abuse was not occurring. Tackett and her mother came into periodic conflict. At one point, her mother went to Hope Rippy's house after learning that Rippy's father had purchased a Ouija board for the girls. She demanded that the board be burnt and that the Rippy house be exorcised. Tackett became increasingly rebellious after her 15th birthday and became fascinated with the occult. She would often attempt to impress her friends by pretending to be possessed by the spirit of Deanna the vampire. Tackett began to engage in self-harm, especially after early 1991 when she began dating a girl who was involved in the practice. Her parents discovered the self-mutilation and checked her into a hospital on March 19, 1991. She was prescribed an antidepressant and released. 2 days later, with her girlfriend and Tony Lawrence, Tackett cut her wrist deeply and was returned to the hospital. After treatment of her wound, she was admitted to the hospital's psychiatric ward. Tackett was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and confessed that she had experienced hallucinations since she was a young child. She was discharged on April 12. She dropped out of high school in September 1991. Tackett stayed in Louisville in October 1991 to live with various friends. There she met Loveless. The two became friends in late November. In December, Tackett moved back to Madison on the promise that her father would buy her a car. She still spent most of her time in Louisville and New Albany, and by December spent most of it with Loveless. Hope Anna Rippy was born in Madison on June 9, 1976. Her father was an engineer at a power plant. Her parents divorced in February 1984, and she moved with her mother and siblings to Quincy, Michigan for 3 years. She claimed that living with her family in Michigan was somewhat turbulent. Her parents resumed their relationship in Madison in 1987. She was reunited with friends Tackett and Tony Lawrence, whom she had known since childhood, although her parents saw Tackett as a bad influence. As with the other girls, Rippy began to self-harm at age 15. Tony Lawrence was born in Madison on February 14, 1976. Her father was a boilermaker. She was close friends with Rippy from childhood. She was abused by a relative at age 9 and was raped by a teenage boy at age 14, although the police only issued an order for the boy to keep away from Lawrence. She went into counseling after the incident, but did not follow through. She became promiscuous, began to self-harm, and attempted suicide in 8th grade. In 1990, 14-year-old Loveless began dating another young girl named Amanda Heavrin. After Loveless' father left the family and her mother remarried, Loveless behaved erratically. She got into fights at school and reported being depressed, resulting in her receiving professional counseling. In March 1991, Loveless came out as a lesbian to her mother, who was initially furious but eventually accepted it. As the year progressed, Loveless' relationship with Heavrin deteriorated. Heavrin met Shanda early in the fall semester at Hazelwood Junior High when they got into a fight. However, they became friends while in detention for the altercation, and later exchanged romantic letters. Loveless immediately grew jealous of Heavrin and Scherer's relationship. In early October 1991, Heavrin and Scherer attended a school dance, where Loveless found and confronted them. Although Heavrin and Loveless had never formally ended their relationship, Loveless started to date an older girl. After Heavrin and Scherer attended a festival together in late October, Loveless began to discuss killing Scherer and threatened her in public. Concerned about the effects of their daughter's relationship with Heavrin, Scherer's parents arranged for her to transfer to a Catholic school in late November. Heavrin states she gave letters Loveless sent her containing death threats towards Scherer to a youth prosecutor, but the youth prosecutor never did anything about it as far as she knew. On the night of January 10, 1992, Lawrence, age 15, Rippy, 15, and Tackett, 17, drove in Tackett's car from Madison to Loveless' house in New Albany. Rippy and Lawrence, while both friends of Tackett, had not previously met Loveless. Upon arrival, they borrowed some clothes from Loveless, and she showed them a knife, telling them she was going to scare Scherer with it. While Tackett, Rippy, and Lawrence had never met Scherer prior to that night, Tackett had already known of the plan to intimidate the 12-year-old girl. Loveless explained to the two other girls that she disliked Scherer for being a copycat and for stealing her girlfriend. Tackett let Rippy drive the 4 girls to Jeffersonville, where Scherer stayed with her father on the weekends, stopping at a McDonald's restaurant en route to ask for directions. They arrived at Scherer's house shortly before dark. Loveless instructed Rippy and Lawrence to go to the door and introduce themselves as friends of Heavrin, Loveless' former and Scherer's current girlfriend, then invite Scherer to come with them to see Heavrin, who was waiting for them at the Witch's Castle or Mistletoe Falls, a ruined stone house located on an isolated hill overlooking the Ohio River. Scherer said that she could not go because her parents were awake, and she told the girls to come back around midnight, a few hours later. Lovelace was angry at first, but Rippy and Lawrence assured her about returning for Shara later. The four girls crossed the river to Louisville and attended a punk rock show by the band Sunspring at the Audubon Skate Park near Interstate 65. Lawrence and Rippy quickly lost interest in the music and went to the parking lot outside, where they engaged in sexual activities with two boys in Tackett's car. Eventually, the four girls left for Shara's house. During the ride, Lovelace said that she could not wait to kill Shara. However, Lovelace also said she just intended to use the knife to frighten her. When they arrived at Shara's house at 12:30 a.m., Lawrence refused to retrieve Shara, so Tackett and Rippy went to the door. Lovelace hid under a blanket in the back seat of the car with the knife. Rippy told Shara that Hebron was still at the witch's castle. Shara was reluctant to go with them, yet agreed after changing her clothes. As they got in the car, Rippy began questioning Shara about her relationship with Hebron. Lovelace then sprang out from the back seat, put the knife to Shara's throat, and began interrogating her about her sexual relationship with Hebron. They drove towards Utica and the witch's castle. Tackett told the girls that a local legend said the house was once owned by 9 witches, and that townspeople burned down the house to get rid of the witches. At the witch's castle, they took a sobbing Shara inside and bound her arms and legs with rope. There, Lovelace taunted that she had pretty hair and wondered how pretty she would look if they were to cut it off, which frightened Shara even more. Lovelace began taking off Shara's rings and handed each to the girls. At some point, Rippy had taken Shara's Mickey Mouse watch and danced to the tune it played. Tackett further taunted Shara, claiming that the witch's castle was filled with human remains and Shara's would be next. To further threaten Shara, Tackett then retrieved a shirt with a smiley design from the car and lit it on fire, but immediately feared that the fire would be spotted by passing cars, so the girls left with Shara. During the car ride, Shara continued begging them to take her back home. Lovelace ordered Shara to slip off her bra, which she then handed over to Rippy, who slid off her own bra and replaced it with Shara's while steering the car. They became lost, so they stopped at a gas station and covered Shara in a blanket. While Tackett went inside to ask for directions, Lawrence called a boy she knew in Louisville and chatted for several minutes to ease her worries, but did not mention Shara's abduction. They returned to the car, but became lost again and pulled up to another gas station. There, Lawrence and Rippy spotted a couple of boys and talked to them before once again getting back into the car and leaving, arriving sometime later at the edge of some woods near Tackett's home in Madison. Tackett led them to a dark abandoned building off a logging road in a densely forested area. Lawrence and Rippy were frightened and stayed in the car. Lovelace and Tackett made Shara strip down to her underwear. Then Lovelace beat Shara with her fists. Next, Lovelace repeatedly slammed Shara's face into her knee, which cut Shara's mouth on her own braces. Lovelace tried to slash Shara's throat, but the knife was too dull. Rippy came out of the car to hold down Shara. Lovelace and Tackett took turns stabbing Shara in the chest. They then strangled Shara with a rope until she was unconscious, placed her in the trunk of the car, and told the other 2 girls that Shara was dead. The girls drove to Tackett's nearby home and went inside to drink soda and clean themselves. When they heard Shara screaming in the trunk, Tackett went out with a paring knife and stabbed her several more times, coming back a few minutes later covered with blood. At 2:30 a.m., Lawrence and Rippy stayed behind as Tackett and Lovelace went country cruising, driving to the nearby town of Cannon. Shara continued to make crying and gurgling noises, so Tackett stopped the car. When they opened the trunk, Shara sat up, covered in blood with her eyes rolled back in her head, but unable to speak. Tackett beat her with a tire iron until she was silent, claiming that she felt the victim's head caving in, and then told Lovelace to smell it. There were also reports of the victim being sexually assaulted with the same weapon. This tire iron assault was off and on for hours as the girls went on a joyride through the countryside. Lovelace and Tackett returned to Tackett's house just before daybreak to clean up again. Rippy asked about Shara, and Tackett laughingly described the torture. The conversation woke up Tackett's mother, who yelled at her daughter for being out late and bringing home the girls, so Tackett agreed to take them home. She drove to the burn pile where they opened the trunk to stare at Shara. Lawrence refused. Rippy sprayed Shara with Windex and taunted, "You are not looking so hot now, are you?" The girls drove to a gas station near Madison Consolidated High School, pumped some gasoline into the car, and bought a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi. Tackett poured out the Pepsi and refilled the bottle with gasoline. They drove north of Madison past Jefferson Proving Ground to Lemon Road off U.S. Route 421, a place known to Rippy. Lawrence remained in the car while Tackett and Rippy wrapped Scherer, who was still alive, in a blanket and carried her to a field by the gravel country road. Tackett made Rippy pour the gasoline on Scherer, and then they set her on fire. Lovelace was not convinced Scherer was dead, so they returned a few minutes later to pour the rest of the gasoline on her. The girls went to a McDonald's restaurant at 9:30 a.m. for breakfast, where they laughed about Scherer's body looking like one of the sausages they were eating. Lawrence then phoned a friend and told her about the murder. Tackett then dropped off Lawrence and Rippy at their homes and finally returned to her own home with Lovelace. She told Heavrin that they had killed Scherer and arranged to pick up Heavrin later that day. A friend of Lovelace, Crystal Wathen, came over to Lovelace's house, and they told her what had happened. Then the three girls drove to pick up Heavrin and take her back to the Lovelace home, where they told Heavrin the story. Both Heavrin and Wathen were reluctant to believe the story until Tackett showed them the trunk of the car with Scherer's bloody handprints and socks. Heavrin was horrified and asked to be taken home. When they pulled up in front of her house, Lovelace kissed Heavrin, told her she loved her, and pleaded with her not to tell anyone. Heavrin promised she would not before entering her house. Later on the morning of January 11, 1992, two brothers from Canaan were driving toward Jefferson Proving Ground to go hunting when they noticed a body on the side of the road. They initially thought it was a mannequin of some sort, but upon exiting the vehicle realized that it was clearly the burned body of a child. They called the police at 10:55 a.m. and were asked to return to the corpse. State Trooper David Cam and Jefferson County Sheriff Buck Shipley and detectives began an investigation, collecting forensic evidence at the scene. They initially suspected a drug deal gone wrong and did not believe the crime had been committed by locals. It is also to be noted that her body was posed in a suggestive position, very obviously meaning that this was done on purpose and with intention. It was also found that the victim's face and hands were burnt in an attempt to keep her unrecognizable and unidentifiable. Scherer's father, Stephen, noticed his daughter was nowhere to be found early on January 11. After phoning neighbors and friends all morning, he called his former wife, Scherer's mother, at 1:45 p.m. They met and filed a missing person report with the Clark County Sheriff. At 8:20 p.m., a hysterical Lawrence and Rippy went to the Jefferson County Sheriff's office with their parents. They both gave very rambling statements, identifying the victim as Shanda, naming the two other girls involved as best as they could, and describing the main events of the previous night. After an inter-county investigation, Shipley contacted the Clark County Sheriff and was finally able to match the body to Scherer's missing person report. Detectives obtained dental records that positively identified Scherer as the victim. Lovelace and Tackett were arrested on January 12. The bulk of the evidence for the arrest warrant came from the statements made by Lawrence and Rippy. The prosecution immediately declared its intention to try both Lovelace and Tackett as adults. For several months, the prosecutors and defense attorneys did not release any information about the case, giving the news media only the statements by Lawrence and Rippy. Tackett and Lovelace were sentenced to 60 years in the Indiana Women's Prison in Indianapolis. Tackett was released in 2018 and served probation for 1 year. Lovelace was released in September 2019. Rippy was sentenced to 60 years, with 10 years suspended for mitigating circumstances, plus 10 years of medium supervision probation. On appeal, a judge reduced the sentence to 35 years. In exchange for her cooperation, Lawrence was allowed to plead guilty to 1 count of criminal confinement and was sentenced to a maximum of 20 years. Lawrence was released on December 14, 2000 after serving 9 years. She remained on parole until December 2002. On April 28, 2006, Rippy was released from Indiana Women's Prison on parole after serving 14 years of her original sentence. She remained on supervised parole for 5 years until April 2011. Tackett was released from Rockville Correctional Facility on January 11, 2018, the 26th anniversary of Scherer's death, after serving nearly 26 years and has completed an additional year of parole. Lovelace was released from Indiana Women's Prison on September 5, 2019, after serving 26 years in prison. Simply lost for words. What a horrible case. I could ramble on for the next few minutes, but no, let's leave it. Thank you for listening to this episode. Please like and subscribe. Please take care of yourselves.